Okay, let's jump right in. We're doing a deep dive today into something really fascinating, the whole world of good writing, but specifically through the eyes of Steven Pinker.
Yeah, the source material you shared, those interview excerpts, they're fantastic. Pinker, the cognitive scientist, talking about language, thinking, and why writing is often, well, let's face it, pretty bad.
Exactly.
Right.
And what makes it good, right. And even touches on AI, which is obviously super relevant now.
And what I think is really valuable here and what we want to unpack for you is that his advice isn't just, follow these rules. It comes straight from cognitive science. It's about how our minds actually work, how we process things, the biases we have. So our mission really is to pull out those key ideas from the interview.
To show you why his advice makes sense, not just what it is.
Precisely. Grounded in the science of how we think.
So you get practical stuff you can actually use, whether it's just an email or something more complex, like trying to explain a big idea.
And looking at it this way, from the cognitive angle, it really helps understand why communication breaks down. It's not just spotting typos, it's seeing the root causes.
Knowing why something doesn't land helps you fix it beforehand. Build that bridge to the reader's mind, like you said.
Yeah, exactly. Anticipate the problems.
Okay, so let's start with the big one Pinker identifies. The main reason for so much bad writing, especially in, academia, government, business.
Right. There's that cynical take, isn't there? The cartoon he mentions, good start, now add more gibberish.
Yeah, the idea that it's deliberate, people using jargon to sound smart or hide weak ideas or just keep people out.
And Pinker says, sure, maybe sometimes ego's involved or wanting to be exclusive, but mostly he thinks it's not actually malice.
It's not intentional obfuscation.
Usually not. He argues the main driver is more like incompetence, but a specific kind rooted in a cognitive bias.
Which is the curse of knowledge.
Bingo. The curse of knowledge. It actually came from economics first, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, about information asymmetry in markets. But psychologists grabbed it because it describes this fundamental human thing. How incredibly hard it is to imagine not knowing something you already know.
Right. Once it's in your head, you can't just delete it and see things fresh.
Exactly. It's like you assume everyone else sees the world, or at least this topic, the way you do now that you understand it. It's sometimes called egocentrism, or like a failure of theory of mind in that moment.
You can't model their lack of knowledge accurately.
You just project your own knowledge onto them.
And Pinker's story about the molecular biologist at TED, that just nails it, doesn't it?
Oh, it's the perfect illustration. He's at TED, right? Place full of smart people wanting to learn new things. This top molecular biologist gets up. Brilliant guy, frontier of his field.
She'd be amazing.
You'd think. But right from the start, he just dives into the super specialized language he uses with his lab colleagues. Technical terms, jargon, assumptions, stuff only insiders would get.
And the audience.
Totally lost. Pinker looks around. Tech people, artists, business folks, other scientists, all smart, curious people. And they just have this glazed, bewildered look. Zero comprehension.
But the speaker didn't notice.
Completely oblivious, just steamed ahead, presenting amazing work in a language nobody understood. Pinker's point is, the guy wasn't stupid. Generally, he was a genius. But he was, quote, very stupid at communicating outside his tiny bubble.
Because the curse of knowledge was hitting him so hard.
So hard, he literally couldn't conceive that they didn't share his basic mental furniture. He didn't realize he was incomprehensible. That's the insidious part.
That inability to see your own blind spot, that's the core.
It is. He wasn't trying to be confusing. He just couldn't access the before state of mind.
So how does this curse, actually show up in writing? What are the signs Pinker points to in the interview?
He lists a few common culprits, especially in technical or academic stuff. One is just like abbreviations and acronyms that only your little group knows.
ROI, LLM, PCR, yeah. You forget others don't live in that world.
Exactly. They're just letters outside your bubble. Then there's jargon, which is different from acronyms. It's the specialized vocabulary.
Synergy. Paradigm shift, or super technical science terms.
Right. Orthogonal validation, epigenetic modification. Perfectly fine, even necessary when experts talk to experts, but deadly when talking to anyone else without explanation.
And the third one, the one he seems really focused on.
Yeah, that's the reliance on abstractions. These are concepts that are so familiar and fundamental to the writer that they don't even think they need explaining or illustrating.
Like his example, the level of the stimulus was proportional to the intensity of the reaction.
Exactly that. A psychologist reads that and thinks, yeah, level of stimulus, intensity of reaction, standard stuff. They feel concrete to them. But try picturing the level of the stimulus. What does it look like?
Nothing, really. It's abstract.
It's a placeholder. It doesn't give the non-expert any sensory experience, whereas the actual experiment might have been something totally concrete.
Like kids look longer at a bunny than a truck. You can picture that immediately.
Exactly. The abstract version is efficient shorthand for the expert, but it completely fails to convey the reality to anyone else. The expert forgets that their abstract concepts aren't basic building blocks for everyone.
Okay, so here's the problem then. If the curse makes you blind to your own lack of clarity, how do you fix it? How do you even know you have it?
Yeah, that's the tricky part. Pinker admits you can try to be empathetic, trying to put yourself in the reader's shoes.
Yeah.
But it's really hard because the curse itself fights against that. Your brain just fills in the gaps automatically.
So trying harder might not be enough.
Often isn't. Which is why he says the single most effective thing, the non-negotiable strategy, is getting feedback. Show your drafts to other people. Period.
And not just any people, right? He's specific about who.
Very specific. Because the type of reader matters. He mentions his mother's smart, reads a lot, but crucially, not a cognitive psychologist. She'd spot things that seemed obvious to him but weren't.
Okay, so an intelligent layperson.
Right. And his editors at his publisher, again, smart professionals, but not experts in his specific field. They represent that target audience.
Makes sense.
But then, maybe the most interesting one, he shows drafts to academics. But academics in different fields.
Why different fields? Wouldn't another academic understand complex stuff?
They might understand complexity, sure. But Pinker points out that even academics get siloed. They get so deep into the jargon and assumptions of their own lab, their own little sub-discipline, that they become unintelligible even to people down the hall.
Wow.
He literally says he'd read thesis proposals from students in his own department and be baffled by the hyper-specific jargon from their little research group.
So the curse can operate on a tiny, tiny scale. Your lab mates get it, nobody else does.
Absolutely. It's the same problem as the biologist, just sometimes even more localized. So getting feedback from smart people outside your immediate circle, like academics in totally different areas, is vital. They're the ones who can flag the assumptions you didn't even realize you were making.
Okay, that really drives it home. It's not about assuming your reader is dumb. It's about realizing you are temporarily communication impaired by your own expertise.
That external check is the best way to pierce the bubble of your own knowledge.
So for you listening, this is maybe the biggest takeaway from this part. You have to fight the curse of knowledge. And you can't trust your own judgment alone. Get feedback from people who are like your target reader but aren't insiders on your topic. Their confusion is gold. It shows you where you went wrong.
Pinker really hammers this home. It's the #1 obstacle he sees.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Pinker's background isn't just language, right? He's also a big name in vision research, cognitive science generally, how the brain perceives the world.
Right. And that deep understanding really shapes his writing advice. It's not just about words on a page.
Which leads to his next major point. Good writing should help the reader actually see what you're talking about.
Exactly. He argues that language itself, the words and grammar, are almost overrated if you think of them as the end goal.
They're a tool.
They're a tool, a means to an end. And the end is conveying ideas. And those ideas are often grounded in sensory experience, things we see, feel, hear, maybe even actions we perform, or emotions. They're not usually just abstract symbols floating in space.
So good writing helps the reader build that mental model, that image.
It helps them form a mental image or grasp the concept in a more concrete, experiential way.
And this ties right back to avoiding those abstractions we just talked about.
Perfectly. Things like paradigm, framework, level, perspective. Pinker's challenge is try to form a mental picture of a paradigm. You can't.
No, it's just a word.
It's just a word. It might be useful shorthand within a field, but it stops the outsider from actually visualizing or grasping the concrete reality being discussed.
It's like describing a house using only architectural jargon someone doesn't know. They hear words but see no house.
That's a great analogy. You get the labels, not the experience.
So how do we actually do this? How do we make writing more concrete, more visual?
Well, the most basic thing Pinker stresses is use examples constantly. Say, for example, for instance, follow up a general statement with a specific case.
Don't leave the generalization hanging.
Never. And also, use visual metaphors, comparisons that connect an abstract idea to something tangible the reader can picture.
He also talks about older prose, right? Why writing from, say, a few centuries ago often feels more vivid.
Yeah, it's a really interesting observation. He suggests that writers back then didn't have centuries of academic jargon to fall back on.
They didn't have the prepackaged abstractions.
Right. So if they wanted to explain something complex or new, they had to reach for images, stories, comparisons that were part of common knowledge at the time.
They had to build the bridge using shared cultural materials.
Exactly. Like his example for something like aggression, instead of that abstract noun, they might have said,
The spirit of the hawk kneaded into our flesh.
Yeah, which sounds, super archaic to us. We wouldn't write that.
Yeah.
But think about why it worked then. Everyone knew hawks. They had a shared image, predatory, fierce. It made the abstract concept tangible through that shared visual.
It connected to something real, not just a label.
Precisely. Now, Pinker's careful here. He's not saying jargon is bad. Modern jargon ecosystems, reagents, species is absolutely essential within a field.
It's efficient.
Massively efficient. It compresses huge amounts of shared knowledge. You couldn't do science without it. Imagine describing a chemical from scratch every time.
Right. But the problem is when that efficient shorthand leaks out.
Without translation. Because of the curse of knowledge, the expert forgets that region isn't a basic word for everyone. They lose the connection to the concrete reality it represents for the non-expert. The visual quality gets sacrificed for that internal efficiency.
So it's not that jargon is inherently evil. It serves a purpose. The mistake is using it outside its context without unpacking it.
That's the key distinction. The failure isn't using it with peers. It's using it with outsiders without helping them see what it means.
Okay, so the actionable advice here for you listening is constantly ask, can my reader picture this? If you're using abstract terms, can you swap in a concrete example, visual metaphor? Describe the actual thing, not just the label. Making it visual makes it stick.
You're essentially trying to create a shared world in their head.
Okay, here's another fundamental point Pinker raises, something we all kind of feel intuitively. Speaking feels natural. Like, babies learn it, parents celebrate first words. It just happens.
Yeah, we seem wired for it.
But writing feels unnatural, has to be taught, often painfully. Kids struggle, adults struggle. Think about the difference in parental excitement over a 2-year-old talking versus an 8-year-old writing a paragraph. It's huge. Why?
Pinker points to a couple of absolutely fundamental differences between spoken conversation and writing that explain this massive gap in difficulty. The first one is shared context, or common ground.
When we talk, we already share a lot of background info.
Totally. We're usually in the same place. We know why we're talking. We know what just happened. The topic is sort of floating in the air between us.
Yeah.
This lets speakers be super efficient. We use words like this, that, here, he, she, it.
And the listener knows exactly what you mean from the situation.
Right. The reference is obvious from the context. But the writer, they have none of that.
They're writing into a vacuum, potentially.
Exactly. Someone might read it years later, different country, writer might even be dead. All the context, who he was, what this thing was, it's all gone. So the writer has to meticulously build that shared understanding on the page.
Every he needs an anchor. That needs definition.
You have to spell it all out. You can't rely on the shared situation because there isn't one. That burden building context from scratch is way heavier in writing.
Okay, that makes sense. And the second big difference.
Real-time feedback. This is enormous.
Yeah. In conversation, you see the other person's face.
Instantly. Furrowed brow. They're confused. Nodding. They get it. Glazed eyes. You've lost them. They can jump in, wait, what? Their body language tells you everything.
And you adjust on the fly.
Immediately.
Yeah.
It's a constant correction loop. It helps you catch misunderstandings, and crucially, it helps you overcome the curse of knowledge without even thinking about it. If they look puzzled when you use a term, you know right away, need to explain that.
You don't have to guess if you're being clear.
Their reaction is the data, but the writer gets none of that.
Zero feedback. You send it out and hope for the best.
Exactly. You're flying blind. You have to anticipate every possible confusion, every ambiguity, all by yourself. No frowns, no clarifying questions, no fidgeting audience to guide you.
Wow. When you put it like that, it really highlights why writing is just fundamentally harder.
It's less forgiving medium. The writer has to carry the entire burden of ensuring clarity, a burden that's shared implicitly in conversation.
So for you, the listener, understanding why writing feels harder, the lack of context, the lack of feedback, isn't an excuse, but it helps explain the struggle. It's not just you, it's the nature of the task. And it underscores why those strategies, like building context explicitly and getting feedback proactively, are so vital. You have to compensate for what conversation gives you automatically.
Knowing the diagnosis helps you apply the right cure.
Let's move to another core idea Pinker emphasizes, quite forcefully actually. It's about the relationship between generalizations and examples. He basically says, one without the other is useless.
Yeah, he puts it starkly. Generalizations without examples are useless, and examples without generalizations are useless. Maybe useless is a tad strong, but it makes a critical point.
Okay, let's break that down. Generalizations without examples, why are they useless?
Well, think about it. A generalization, by definition, smooths over details. It captures a pattern, but erases the specifics. If you only give the general rule, the reader often thinks, okay, but what does that actually look like? What are you really talking about?
It's too abstract. It doesn't connect to anything real.
Right. It floats. Now, flip side. Examples without generalizations. Why are they useless? That's the opposite issue. You give a list of specific instances, anecdotes. This happened, then this other thing. The reader might follow each specific point, but they're left wondering.
So what? What's the point?
Exactly. What do all these details add up to? What's the bigger picture or principle here? It lacks a frame, a takeaway message.
Okay, so you need both to make sense.
Absolutely. Which leads Pinker to talk about this trade-off between context and compression.
Context and compression. Tell me more.
Context comes from the examples, the details. Like someone describing every single second of their train journey.
Yeah.
It's maximum context, right? All the sensory details, the specifics, but...
It takes forever. Zero compression.
Right. Compression comes in the generalization. Just saying, it was an easy train ride. That's high compression. Summarizes everything quickly.
Yeah.
But you lose all the context, all the details.
So good writing needs to balance the two.
It's the swing and the dance between them, as he calls it. You need the generalization for the main point, the compression, the framework. Tells the reader what you're talking about. But you desperately need the examples for the context, the specifics, the proof. They show the reader what the generalization means in reality.
His example about words like bathroom or breakfast shows this perfectly.
It's such a simple, clear illustration. You state the generalization. Lots of English words don't literally mean what their parts suggest. Okay, fine, sounds plausible.
It doesn't really sink in.
Not really. Not until you hit them with the examples. A bathroom often doesn't have a bath. Breakfast isn't always breaking a literal fast. Christmas means more than Christ's Mass.
Suddenly, boom, you get it. The examples make the abstract rule concrete.
The generalization gives the rule. The examples give the evidence and make the rule tangible. You need both working together.
So, listener takeaway, practice this dance. Never state a general principle without giving a concrete example right after. And if you're listing examples, make sure you explicitly state the generalization they illustrate. Don't make the reader guess the point. This back and forth is key.
It's how you make complex things clear, really.
Okay, let's pivot slightly to something really fun. The sheer weirdness and history baked into language itself. Pinker references that list from Richard Lederer. You know, the funny questions like, if adults commit adultery, do infants commit infantry?
Oh yeah, Lederer's great at collecting those linguistic oddities. They seem like just jokes, but Pinker points out they actually reveal some deep truths about English.
They're not just wordplay.
They're wordplay that illustrates how language really works, or doesn't work logically sometimes. They show it's not this perfectly clean, rational system.
Okay, so what truths do these jokes reveal?
Well, first, they highlight semantic drift. How word meanings change over time and disconnect from their origins. Adultery is the classic case. It used to relate to adulterate corrupting something. Now it means infidelity. The original link is lost for most people. The meaning drifted.
The history is buried.
Totally. Second, they show there's no single consistent logic for how compound words work. The relationship between the parts changes. Olive oil is oil from olives. Baby oil is oil for babies. Motor oil is oil for motors. The underlying logic for is different each time.
You just have to know each word. You can't predict it from a rule.
Pretty much. And third, they show language has this fossil record. It keeps bits of old grammar or word formation rules that aren't used anymore. Pinker uses the ending. In singer or writer, it's a live rule. Verb plus person who does the verb. We still make new words like blogger.
Right, but then you have finger.
Exactly. Looks the same, ends in But fingers don't fing. That isn't from the current rule. It's a leftover, a fossil from some older stage of the language. You need etymology, word history, to dig that out.
That's wild. So everyday language is full of these historical quirks and inconsistencies.
Absolutely. It's messy, it evolves, it keeps old stuff. It's not like code designed by an engineer. It's more like an old city with layers built on layers.
For you, the listener, just appreciating this messy historical side of language is useful. It explains why things aren't always logical, why idioms work the way they do, and why just looking at word parts doesn't always tell you the meaning. It adds depth to the tool we use every day.
Makes you realize language mastery is about navigating history, not just memorizing rules.
Okay, we've hit clarity and structure hard. But Pinker doesn't stop there. He also talks about, let's call it the art of writing the aesthetics, the pleasure, the style. This connects to his other interests, like beauty and vision, photography. How does he approach making prose not just clear, but also good to read, enjoyable?
Right. Clarity first, always. But beyond that, yes, he definitely cares about making prose aesthetically pleasing. He mentions several ingredients for this.
We already talked about visual imagery.
Definitely key. Helping the reader see is both for clarity and for pleasure. But beyond that, he talks about euphony, literally good sound.
How the words actually sound.
Exactly. Even when read silently, we kind of hear the words in our head. Pinker's a big advocate for reading drafts aloud, or at least mumbling them. If you stumble saying it, the reader will likely stumble reading it.
And related to that is rhythm, right?
Yes, metrical structure or rhythm. Prose is in poetry, no strict meter. But it still has a flow, a cadence of stresses and pauses. Awkward phrasing disrupts that rhythm, makes it feel clunky. Good prose sort of flows effortlessly.
He even gets specific about avoiding certain sounds, like...
Yeah, too many sibilant sounds. It's close together. It can sound hissy or just unpleasant. He says he sometimes consciously swaps words just to avoid too much sibilance.
choosing a synonym for better sound.
Right. And then there are things like alliteration.
Repeating sounds at the start of words.
Yeah, but he advocates using it subtly. Not like Peter Piper picked, where it smacks you in the face. Just a light touch here and there. He says it adds a little spark of pleasure, makes sentences roll past more easily. It adds style without being distracting.
It's interesting how these subtle sound things really affect the reading experience, even if you're not consciously noticing them.
Totally. It's about the overall cognitive load and perceptual experience. Good aesthetics make reading smoother, less effortful, more rewarding. It shows the writer cares about the reader's experience.
So, for you listening, after you nail the clarity, think about the sound and feel, read it aloud, listen for clunky bits, can you smooth the rhythm? Avoid awkward sound clusters, maybe add a touch of subtle alliteration. It can really elevate your writing from just functional to actually enjoyable.
It's crafting the experience, not just delivering the data.
Now, Pinker's known for being pretty outspoken, especially about bad academic writing. It clearly bothers him more than just a little bit. Why does he get so worked up about it? Why does it get under his skin, as he puts it?
Yeah, he feels strongly about it, and for him, it's about the real-world negative consequences. It's not just grammar nitpicking.
What are the main reasons he gives?
Well, a huge one is just the sheer waste. Waste of knowledge, waste of talent. He sees brilliant people doing important work, often publicly funded, but their findings stay locked up behind impenetrable jargon and awful prose.
So the public, or even experts in other fields, can't access it.
Exactly. All that insight just entertains, as he says, this tiny little circle. It's a massive loss. Then there's the wasted effort and risk of misunderstanding, even within fields.
Like having to reread a paragraph 10 times.
Right. If someone like Pinker has to struggle for an hour to decode a single paragraph in a journal article, think about the cumulative wasted time across a whole field. And worse, unclear writing leads to mistakes. People misinterpret findings, misapply ideas, misjudge proposals.
Which could have serious consequences in science or policy.
Absolutely. And finally, there's the point you mentioned, the lost opportunity for pleasure. Reading clear, well-crafted prose about interesting ideas should be enjoyable. Slogging through dense, turgid, clunky writing is just painful. It makes learning feel like a chore.
And he has a particular irritation with people in his own field, right? Linguistics, cognitive science.
Oh, yeah, that really gets him. Because these are people who literally study language, how sentences work, what makes things hard to understand. For them to then write incomprehensibly feels like they're ignoring their own research.
It's like a chef who can't cook, almost.
Kind of. It demonstrates a lack of application of the very principles they investigate.
So his passion comes from seeing bad writing as inefficient, prone to error, inaccessible, and just plain unpleasant. It hinders progress and understanding.
Exactly. Clear writing, for him, is about effectiveness, efficiency, and a kind of intellectual generosity. Bad writing fails on all counts.
So, listener takeaway. Maybe adopt some of Pinker's righteous indignation. See clear writing not just as a personal skill, but as a way to make knowledge work better, to respect readers, and to let good ideas actually have the impact they should. The costs of bad writing are real. We touched on older writing feeling different. Pinker notes that even non-professional writers back then, industrialists, scientists, doctors like Rockefeller, Edison, Darwin, Holmes Sr., often wrote really well. Better, sometimes, than professional writers today.
Yeah, it's a striking observation. Why did people whose main job wasn't writing often produce such clear, cultivated prose? He offers a few potential explanations.
Education must be part of it.
Definitely. He suggests they were often steeped in the classics, reading great literature, history, philosophy that provides models of good writing, sentence structure, argument. They learned by exposure.
And maybe writing just mattered more publicly back then.
Huge difference. Before phones, radio, internet, writing was often the primary way you presented yourself and your ideas to the world. Letters, essays, reports. So crafting your writing style was like crafting your public image. It was taken seriously.
Part of how you showed competence and credibility.
Exactly. And the third reason loops back to jargon again. Many fields were younger. They didn't have the centuries of specialized terminology built up.
So they couldn't just plug concepts into existing abstract slots.
Right. To explain something new, like Darwin explaining evolution, they often had to find vivid language, analogies, metaphors drawn from common experience that an educated reader could grasp. It forced a certain kind of concreteness.
They had to invent the explanatory language itself, in a way.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
Alongside this, Pinker talks about a really big long-term shift in society that affects all communication. Informalization.
Informalization. Sounds like things getting less formal.
That's exactly it. And you see it everywhere, not just language. Think about clothes, hats, and gloves disappearing, casual Fridays becoming casual every day. Think about how we address people defaulting to first names almost instantly now, where Mr. N's last name used to be standard.
Right. Calling your teacher by their first name, unthinkable decades ago, normal now.
Exactly. Even things like swearing becoming more common in public discourse. It's all part of this century-long trend away from rigid formality.
Why did that happen?
Pinker suggests it's partly due to eroding hierarchies class, status driven by democracy and mobility, and also a cultural shift, maybe linked to Romanticism, that values authenticity, spontaneity, being real, over appearing stiff, formal, or calculated.
Putting on airs became less desirable.
Right. And that directly hits writing style. Prose that sounds too fancy, too literary in the old sense, too obviously crafted, can now come across as pompous or distant. People often prefer writing that feels more direct, natural, conversational.
So the kind of informal vernacular style we often aim for now is a product of this historical shift.
Precisely. It reflects a cultural valuing of intimacy and spontaneity over formality and distance.
Understanding that history is useful. It shows that good writing isn't a fixed target. It changes with cultural values and how we see ourselves in communication.
It puts today's stylistic norms in context.
Which leads us smack into the present and the future. Large language models, AI, ChatGPT. What's Pinker's take on these, based on the interview?
Well, he's been thinking about AI and language forever, so he has a deep perspective. He gives a pretty balanced view of what LLMs produce right now.
What does he see as the good parts of AI writing?
He acknowledges it's often surprisingly structurally sound. Sentences are usually grammatical, follow simple patterns. The overall flow can be quite logical, intro, points, conclusion. And crucially, he notes, it often avoids that dense academies or jargon he hates. So on a basic structural level, it's often pretty clear.
It doesn't seem to suffer from the curse of knowledge in the same way, maybe.
Perhaps. Being trained on such vast, diverse text might average out the obscure jargon in favor of more common phrasing.
Okay, so structurally, what are the downsides, the bad parts?
His main critique is that it's incredibly generic, prosaic, banal. It lacks any real voice, personality, originality, flair. He says you can often spot AI writing because it feels so blandly competent. No spark.
Why would it be structurally okay, but so vanilla?
He speculates a bit. One idea is the training, especially the human feedback part, RLHF. If humans reward outputs that are helpful and harmless, they might be pushing the AI towards safe, conventional, uncontroversial language, killing any interesting edges. He also has this cool analogy to faces. You know how averaging many faces makes a composite that looks more attractive than most individuals because it smooths out quirks?
Yeah, the average face effect.
He wonders if LLMs do something similar with text. Averaging billions of sentences might smooth out all the weird, awkward, or highly individualistic human writing styles, leaving you with something grammatically correct and structurally sound, but utterly generic. The statistical average.
It gets rid of the bad stuff, but also the really good, unique stuff.
That seemed to be the idea. It lands in the safe, predictable middle.
So how does this explosion of LLMs change how Pinker thinks about his own work or language or cognition?
He reflects that their success forces him and the field to give more weight to the sheer power of abstracting statistical patterns from massive data sets. His background and much classic cognitive science focus more on rules, logic, symbols. It's harder in that framework to see how just crunching text could lead to seemingly intelligent output.
But LLMs prove that pattern matching on a huge scale is incredibly powerful.
Yes. Now, he's quick to say this doesn't mean the human mind is an LLM. He stresses human learning is grounded in the real world, interaction, embodiment, not just text. But LLM success shows that this statistical pattern extraction is a bigger piece of the intelligence puzzle than maybe previously thought. He'd integrate that more, reconcile it with rule-based thinking.
Paying more attention to the power of learning from huge amounts of data. So for you listening, AI is here. It's changing things. Understanding what it does well now, structure, basic clarity, and what it does poorly, voice, originality, deep understanding, is key. As AI takes over more routine writing tasks, maybe Pinker's advice becomes even more important for humans. Maybe we need to lean into the things AI can't do, the vivid sensory details, the personal examples, the unique voice, the aesthetic craft, the insights from real experience.
It really pushes us to think about what human writers uniquely bring to the table. Maybe it's less about perfect grammar, which AI might handle, and more about that unique perspective, style, and connection to lived reality.
We have really covered a lot of ground here, diving deep into Steven Pinker's insights from that interview. We kicked off with the biggest hurdle, the curse of knowledge, how it makes us blind, and why getting feedback is the only reliable cure.
We saw how Pinker links good writing directly to cognition, helping readers see through concrete examples and imagery, moving beyond just abstract labels, and how historical context shaped older, often more vivid prose before jargon took over.
We unpacked why writing feels so much harder than speaking, that crucial lack of shared context and real-time feedback, forcing the writer to do all the heavy lifting for clarity.
We talked about that essential dance between generalizations and examples, how you absolutely need both for ideas to land, balancing compression with context.
We had that fun detour into language quirks with Litterer's List, revealing the hidden history, semantic drift, and fossilized rules embedded in everyday English.
And we went beyond just clarity, exploring the aesthetic side, how sound, rhythm, and word choice create prose that's not just understood, but enjoyed.
We also understood Pinker's passion, why he fights bad writing so hard, seeing it as a waste of knowledge, time, and pleasure. And we put modern writing styles into perspective with the long trend of informalization.
And finally, we tackled the present and future with AI, looking at what LLMs do well and poorly, and how their rise forces us to rethink intelligence and the future of human writing itself.
The goal here was to give you practical, usable insights, grounded in how our minds actually work, that you can apply to your own communication starting now.
And maybe one last thing for you to chew on, building on all this, we see this historical push towards informal conversational writing. And now we have AI getting really good at producing clear but ultimately generic prose. So what does that mean for human writers? Does it mean that cultivating a truly unique voice, leaning into sensory detail, personal experience, and maybe even a more deliberate, crafted aesthetic style, the things AI struggles with, becomes even more important if we want our writing to truly connect and stand out from the increasingly competent machine?
That's a fantastic question to end on. What makes human writing uniquely valuable in the age of AI? Lots to think about there. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Steven Pinker's principles of good writing. We hope it gives you powerful tools and a fresh perspective on communicating effectively.